Hello, my name is David Giffey. I'm a veteran of the war in Vietnam, and I'm an artist and a journalist. I designed the Dove Mound behind me here in 1985, and I helped about 300 volunteers build it in 1989. Today I'd like to tell you the story of the Mourning Dove Mound and how it came to be here at the Highground. But first, I would like to thank the staff at the Highground, the people who work here, for taking care of the Dove Mound since we built it in 1989. Long before 1989, the year that we built the Dove Mound, I was drafted into the U.S. Army in 1963. Some of you probably grew up in the country. So did I. I grew up on a small dairy farm near Fond du Lac. After I was drafted, I was sent to Vietnam on a ship in 1965, 55 years ago. Vietnam is 10,000 miles from the United States, across the Pacific Ocean. I was on that ship with 3,000 other soldiers of the 1st Infantry Division. I came home from the war in 1966. My time in Vietnam during the war was very important to me. I have spent many years thinking about the costs of war and working for peace as much as possible. For example, I'm a member of an organization called Veterans for Peace. Before I tell you the Dove Mound story, please think of questions that you would like to ask. You can ask your parents, your teachers, you can ask me about war and peace and the U.S. military, which includes the Army, the Marines, the Navy, the Air Force, the National Guard, the Reserves, and the U.S. Coast Guard. Now for the story of the Dove Mound. There was an art contest in 1985 to design various parts of the Highground. I wanted to enter the contest because I'm an artist, as I said, so I drove to Clark County, about 3 hours or 3.5 hours from my home in southwestern Wisconsin. I did not have any idea for a design. But when I drove into what is now the paved parking lot, a small gray mourning dove flew across my windshield, and that gave me an idea. I walked around what was become the park. I took photographs. I thought about my idea, and then I returned to my home, and I studied the photographs and began to make drawings. I pieced 2 of the photographs together like this, and the first drawing I made was this one. I'd like to ask you a question now. What do you think this is? For those of you who don't know, that's a mourning dove, a recording of a mourning dove song. The mourning dove is the official Wisconsin state bird of peace. Doves are symbols of peace around the world in all cultures. The mound here that we built measures 130 feet approximately from wingtip to wingtip, and it's about 100 feet long, and it's about 7 feet tall. The mound was made from more than 700,000 pounds of earth. It contains earth from all 72 counties of Wisconsin, from a number of different states and other countries. The story of the Mourning Dove Effigy Mound actually began before we built it in 1989. It began about 2,500 years ago, when Native American mound builders in Wisconsin first made burial mounds. Centuries later, Native people, Native American people, built many large mounds in Wisconsin, effigy mounds shaped like birds and animals and reptiles. This is a quote from this magazine. It's an art magazine. It's called the First American Art Magazine. And the editor of the magazine came to Wisconsin in 2016, and she wrote a story about the effigy mounds. And she said, quote, "Southern Wisconsin has the greatest concentration of effigy mounds in the world," according to America Meredith. That's her name. The Wisconsin Historical Society identifies 3,200 effigy mounds among 15,000 mounds recorded in Wisconsin. I was born and raised in Wisconsin. I was aware of the fact that mound builders and mounds existed in Wisconsin when I entered the Highground contest. But my ancestors were European immigrants. Therefore, I wasn't qualified to impose my views on sacred Native American ceremonies and traditions. It was essential for me to consult with First American people and ask for their guidance regarding ceremonial traditions. I had a friend named Howard Sherpy, who was also a Vietnam veteran. He died in 2016. And he knew a lot more about Native American mounds than I did. He was one of the people who came up with the original idea of the Highground, and he was on the very first board of directors. The board wanted to choose a design for prisoners of war and soldiers missing in action. And the Dove Mound was chosen. Howard Chirpy was in favor of the Dove. He said, quote, "It was a symbol of peace and was a bird wanting to fly free but rooted in the ground." The mourning dove was also native, Howard Chirpy wrote, to the Highground, as it was, and the effigy mound was here long before foreigners ever ventured into Wisconsin, Howard said. After Howard Chirpy informed me that the Highground Design Committee had chosen the mourning dove mound as a Vietnam memorial, the second memorial to be built here at the park, I met John Bodine of the Chippewa tribe. He was also a Vietnam veteran and a lawyer. As a Native American, he was familiar with the traditions, and he paid special attention to cases involving Native Americans and people of color. John visited my studio with his daughter and examined the drawings and the proposal that I had written, and he gave his approval. He continued to advise me on Dove Mound matters until his death due to cancer in 1993. He gave me a business card, too, which said, "Family business in North America for about 100,000 years." Isn't that amazing? The people that we call Native Americans, or Indians, were the original people who lived here for thousands of years, before people like my grandparents or my great-grandparents immigrated to the United States from Europe. John Bodine spoke to a crowd of about 1,000 people during the 1989 dedication ceremony of the mourning dove. His comments are preserved here at the Highground on a bronze sign that's embedded in a boulder up the hill. John said, quote, "This effigy mound is a spiritual place where you can come and let your mother, the earth, hold you. Let the children play on it, dance on it. Use it to unload your grief and pain. Let it renew and strengthen you. Lay back in the soft fold of its wings and let Mother Earth unburden you. Then get up and leave your troubles and cares on the mound as you walk away renewed and refreshed." Unquote. John Bodine's words were really prophetic. Howard Chirpy, my friend, wrote later, quote, "Little did we know that John would lose his battle with cancer 3 years later, and as was his wish, I spread his ashes on the mound during a ceremony at which his daughter did a shawl dance to the music of an Indian song, Howard Chirpy wrote, and the Dove has become the final resting place for many people since it was built. What began as a memorial for prisoners of war and missing in action soldiers, Howard said, has taken on a much greater significance. It has developed a life of its own and has become a symbol of the peace we all seek. I was given this ceremonial pipe by a Native American man named Cody Enoch, who died also a few years ago. It was carved, he carved it, he was an artist, and he carved this for me. He was a Lakota Sioux Native American, and I took this pipe and we used it at a dedication ceremony for a Vietnamese American Peace Park in Vietnam in 1995. Howard Chirpy was correct when he pointed out that prisoners of war and missing in action soldiers and their families need a resting place. But he couldn't know years ago that the cost of wars would be so high. In Vietnam, about 59,000 American soldiers were killed over 10 years, and that's a very tragic number. About 1,600 Americans were listed as missing in action in 2018. But while all this is very tragic, it's important to remember that more than 300,000 Vietnamese soldiers are still missing in action. Let's think briefly about another war, the war in Afghanistan. There have been almost 3,000 soldiers killed in the war in Afghanistan. Again, a tragedy. But since 2001, for almost 20 years, when the war began, more than 111,000 Afghans, including civilians, have been killed in that war. And the word civilians, for those of you who don't know what it means children just like you, people who are just like you. Civilians are not soldiers. They have families like you do, and they go to school. For years, Veterans for Peace has sponsored essay contests for high school graduates. One of the graduates wrote this year, said in his essay, quote, "It is crucial that we as human beings remember the grotesque nature of warfare. We must keep the past alive to maintain peace in our time." People like you, and maybe you yourself, are asking questions right now about many things, including the pandemic. How long will it last? Should I wear a mask? There are many questions on our minds. You're welcome to ask questions. Teachers and families, please take note. You can send your questions and comments to me. This is my name. My first name is David. My last name is spelled Giff, as in friend, E-Y. You can send your questions and comments to Post Office Box 206, Arena, A-R-E-N-A, Wisconsin, 53503. I promise you I'll try to respond or pass the questions along to the Highground. Thank you for watching this video. Please visit the Dove Mound at the Highground, and don't forget to ask questions.